Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Dan. I'm as part of the Open Telemetry End User SIG. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of hosting this panel. In the OTel End User SIG, we normally focus on Open Telemetry. I mean, it's in the name. We host end users telling us how they're adopting observability best practices across the industry. If you want to know more, you follow the QR code in the screen and you'll find how to get in touch. However, this time, we're going to be getting some tips and tricks from true veterans in the tech conference arena. We'll be talking about how to write good CFPs, what topics to choose, how to prepare for a talk, or even why going through the whole process of applying to speak at a conference and how it's well worth it. So if you have recently applied maybe to speak at KubeCon or Observability Day in London or another conference, it doesn't matter if you made it or not. I think these experts will have some advice that you can take home and use in your future talks. We want this to be an interactive panel, so if you're watching live on YouTube or LinkedIn and you have any questions related to the topics that we're discussing, please drop them in the chat, and I will try to incorporate them into the discussion as best I can. Okay, so it's time to meet our panelists. And if you're watching live on YouTube or LinkedIn, I would love to know where you're watching from. So drop a comment in the chat and tell us where you're watching from. Myself, I'm in Edinburgh, Scotland, where it's currently 5:02 p.m. So let's meet our first panelist, Adriana. Hello. Can you tell us where you're connecting from and a little bit about yourself?
Hey, Dan, nice to see you. My name is Adriana Villela. I am connecting from Toronto, Canada. It is noon here, and I work alongside Dan as one of the maintainers of the OTel End User SIG.
Thank you very much. And Henrik. Hello, Henrik.
Hey, pleasure to see you. Pleasure to be here. So my name is Henrik Rexed. So like it's written in the bottom of my video. So I'm based in south of France, the beautiful sunny south of France, even if it's still 10-15 degrees at the moment, Celsius. And it's 6:03 local time in France. And otherwise, I'm trying to be involved in a lot of observability topics, so tag observability, and I try to give hands as well in the end user SIG as well.
Thank you very much. Josh, are you there? Hello.
Yes, hello. Thanks for having me. I'm Josh. I've been a developer advocate and product manager and all kinds of things around open telemetry. And I'm connecting from Brussels, where I'm here for FOSDEM starting on Saturday. Looking forward to that.
I like the European representation here. Reese, and last but not least, Reese, how's it going?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I am joining from Vancouver, Washington, not to be confused with Vancouver, BC. Right, it's like 10 minutes north of Portland. I work in developer relations at New Relic, and I also work with these lovely folks in the open telemetry community, primarily as part of the end user SIG.
All right, thanks to everyone for being here. Right, so let's start with the first topic, the first question from me, which is going to be directed to Adriana. What is a CFP in the first place? Can you tell us more about it?
Ooh, starting with the tough questions. Okay, CFP, if I got this right, stands for call for proposals or call for papers, depending on the context. And so it's basically a request for a proposal for a talk in the context of conferences, where you basically, you have an idea for a talk and you give the details for said talk. And depending on what conference you're applying to, the details will vary from conference to conference. For example, if anyone's ever applied to SRECon, it is a song and a dance to apply to SRECon, because I feel like they really want you to hash out all of the details of your proposal ahead of time, compared to, like, say, a KubeCon, where you can, like, be a little bit more high level. So yeah, that is CFP in a nutshell. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in.
For me, CFP is the opportunity to be in a conference to meet people, to network, because at the end, in my role, to be able to reach out to that conference to need excuse, and the great excuse is to talk. so, so for me, a CFP is like, maybe we'll have some miles with my Air France, because I'm an Air France member. If I'm accepted, that will be great.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so we'll move into the next one. I think if you're like new to conferences, you're probably thinking, okay, so how do I find conferences to talk at? So Josh, can you tell us a bit more about how you go about like finding what conferences you want to apply to speak at?
Yeah, absolutely. So a really good way is to use the aggregator sites that a lot of the conferences will post their CFPs on. So that would be, I think the two big ones would be Sessionize and Papercall. And then what's the third one? Anyone can help me out with the name of that third one? Pretalks. Pretalks is the third one. So yeah, you can kind of check out those, or Sketch, right? But those are not necessarily going to be specific to the area that you want to speak at, right? Of course, for the CNCF, you can look at all of the CNCF events. That's going to be relevant for OpenTelemetry topics. There are also a lot of aggregators. I think we can maybe add some of those to this resources list after this is done. But yeah, there are some GitHub repos and some like Airtable databases that are maintained fairly well that just sort of keep an up-to-date list of all of the ongoing CFPs sorted by their due dates.
Nice. And then from those, like, do you normally choose by like the topic of a conference, or do you just? I mean, I rather like have everyone talk about OpenTelemetry all the time, everywhere in every conference. But like, is that something that you do normally, or like what? How do you choose then? What conference for a? Do you normally choose a specific topic of a conference?
Sometimes I think the topic helps narrow down the initial list, and then from there. Maybe Henrik has something to say on this.
No. I'm changing the display. That's I
forget what I was saying about that. Oh yeah, so right. So the topic I think narrows down the list, but especially if your topic is as broad as DevOps or even observability, that's not going to narrow it down that much. There are still a lot of conferences. So then you have to pick, like, where am I okay to travel? Do I like to travel far like Henrik and rack up those miles? Or do I want to maybe get my start somewhere that I can drive to and I don't have to get a hotel? Right? And how big will the conference be? I think there's a really big difference between speaking at a single track conference as a first-time speaker versus speaking at a multi-track conference. I think we'll maybe get into that in some of the other questions. But yeah, I think just the topic alone is not enough to narrow it down.
Nice. That's cool. All right, so we've found the conference. We've got some resources there that people can go and check out to find where to speak. And I guess a question for Reese: what makes you want to speak? Why do you apply to speak at conferences?
One thing that I kind of found out early on was because my job is so busy that it sometimes can be hard to find time to learn something new, or something maybe more niche. And so if I can submit a topic and it gets accepted on something that I want to learn more about, then that automatically gives me the time and bandwidth to work on that topic and learn about it. So that's one reason. And now that I've been doing it a while, just the benefits from the physical interactions of being able to be in the same space as people who want to learn about these things and having conversations about it. One, I'm able to learn more. And then also there's a lot of other people that also want to learn the same thing, that I wanted to learn. And so it just becomes like this really cool collective, I guess. And you get to meet a lot of cool people that way too. And, not just like for professional networking, but also like some have become like personal friends. It's just really great. It's a great community, like exposure to community.
Yeah, it's like is that networking aspect as well. Not sure if Adriana, for example, do you want to?
Yeah, I was gonna say sometimes for me personally, like speaking is almost like a challenge. I love speaking in front of audiences, but I also find it a little bit terrifying. So this kind of like forces me to get past that discomfort. But another thing that I wanted to point out on like why to speak, especially for those of us who are in an underrepresented group in tech, I think the more of us in underrepresented groups that go out and do talks, the more we can show those folks in underrepresented groups that we exist and we can empower them to go out and speak as well. And I think that's so, so important.
100%.
Just to add as well, I think all of us, we all working in technical environments, and sometimes we think that what we are working on is quite normal and nothing special, but there's always some things to learn. So if you like the community and you want to share your work, you want to share your experience, you share your journey to go through being a completely beginners to a completely experts, and the advices that you can share, I think it's the best opportunity, because I think sharing a talk, I think it's maybe a lot of sharing knowledge and educations to the community. So I think it's an amazing opportunity for all one.
Yeah, and as well, like for someone that's not like a DevRel, for example, Josh, that is working on the areas like, what motivates you, for example?
Yeah, well, no, so I am a full-time DevRel, so I get the same excuse as Reese, right? Like if I get a talk accepted, that's brownie points for my boss, and it justifies my existence a little bit. But for people who don't have that motivation, right? There's another thing that DevRels actually do that's really, really important, right? Which is bring feedback back from the community. So that's another thing. If you're an engineer on an engineering team, right? Like it can get a little bit insular in our bubbles. And so going and talking at a conference is a chance to kind of kick the tires on some ideas with some people that are new people to you, and gather that feedback from the community as well.
Yeah, I think that's it as well. Sometimes you forget that what you're doing, it might be, something that is ahead of a curve, and you you want to give back, right? That's great. Okay, moving on. Let's say that, now basically I'm convinced that I want to talk, but sometimes, there is I think a lot of us suffer from imposter syndrome, and you think that you're not good enough to talk about a certain topic. So I'll go back to you, Adriana. How do you get past that imposter syndrome and that sort of I don't know enough to talk about a topic?
I feel like you just have to force yourself past it, just force yourself to do it anyway. Because you know what? If you don't do it, someone else is going to do it. So why not you, right? And I think, a lot of times, I think this is advice that someone gave me early on when I started applying for talks, which is you don't have to be the expert. And I think Reese touched upon this too. You don't necessarily have to be the expert. You can use this as an opportunity to force yourself to learn something about a topic. Or the other thing is I have to be the expert to be able to speak intelligently about it. But there's something to be said for having kind of a newbie's point of view as well, because we are so much more relatable that way when we talk about our experiences as newbies, because there's so many people who are new to things, and to show people that you're human and you're not some perfect being that's up on this pedestal. I think it makes it super relatable and more fun too for people to learn. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Adriana, maybe, I don't know if you've gotten to this point. I have not gotten to the point where I don't have a little bit of imposter syndrome or stage fright, right? It just never goes away completely, I think.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you really do just have to push through it, because it's always there.
But I think it's the talk that you mentioned before. It's the opportunity to learn and to be more expert on that side. But even if you're not the maintainer, the main contributor of the project, or whatever topics you decided to present, I think if you have a way of presenting that is super interesting, brings a lot of entertainment, and people will probably listen more to your talk to someone who is very boring on stage, you don't need to be the full experts. It's just sharing your passion in a very funny way, or in your way, in fact, and that brings value for the audience.
That is such a good point. I've seen talks where, with such a subject matter experts who are really, really knowledgeable about the subject, but they weren't necessarily presenting it in the most absorbable way for a larger audience. And I've seen people who were newer to the subject, do really creative things that for me, I was able to like, oh my gosh, yes, this makes complete sense. And so I think that is a really good point. You have your, you can bring your own perspective into things, and the way you like share your knowledge, I guarantee you it will resonate with somebody in the audience.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
will also say that this is why Reese and I have cats on our slides.
So you mean that you bought cats just for conferences, or you had cats in the beginning?
Oh, so like Reese's cat Taco is like the most photogenic cat ever, and so we just like feature her on a bunch of our slides whenever we do talks together.
She has a British short hair. She's ridiculous. I don't know if she's a real animal, but anyways.
Nice. I think we talked about, and you. So go ahead. Yeah. No, go ahead. Yes.
I was just going to add, if the conference organizers chose your talk, like, right, like just don't be afraid to submit. And then if you get chosen, you got chosen. They want you to talk about it more than anyone else. So
that is so true. I think we talked a bit about end users, and like, I think in OpenTelemetry and observability, for example, you may think as an end user, or, people will want to know about the latest thing that maintainers have been working on in OTel, or the latest thing that this particular vendor is delivering. But I think there is a lot of value from end users, like telling their stories as well. Like, do you agree with that, Henrik, for example? I think you talked about that previously.
Yeah, I think, I mean, having vendors presenting, they will bring always their angle. And I think having a user sharing their story, they have always a different angle. And a journey or an experience is always super interesting. It's like a book where you have an adventure and you just follow the adventure. So I think it brings lots of value to the audience. Sometimes even more values to have someone like me, like a DevRel, going on stage, because I won't have necessarily this experience and this journey. I will bring the same topic in a different angle. So I think user has, I mean, in a real experience talk, I think it's the best ones from my perspective.
Anyone else that wants to chime in on the end user?
Absolutely. So we recently organized the Open Source Analytics Conference at my company, and where we participated in organizing it. At the beginning of the process, right, choosing the talks, we specifically separated out all of the end user talks because we didn't have enough of them, and we wanted to make sure that they were well represented in the schedule. So we definitely gave preferential treatment to those, and the reason for that is for everything that Henrik said, right? Like, it's like other people want to get these stories that they can follow along with and relate to, that don't have that vendor spin necessarily.
Yeah, I think we got that basically from one of our audience saying that, end users just give a different weight to that, to what they're saying, right? Because they are using it in production, they're using it in their systems. So yeah, definitely. Okay, I think we can move on to another topic, which is the topic. So we've got we've got an idea, like we want to speak to a conference, and then we how do you actually decide what topics to go through? I guess like what topics to put in that CFP. And I will ask that to Reese.
So this is an interesting question, because when I submitted my very first CFP to KubeCon it was for KubeCon EU 2022. I think OpenTelemetry was still pretty new as a topic at KubeCon at that time, and so I think for like the first couple years, I was having pretty good success getting like my topics selected, and I've found in the last year it's been getting harder. One, because there's more people talking about it, but also there's more and more things being covered. And so I think it's been interesting to kind of figure out like, oh, now it's time to get like really kind of niche. I mean, there's still, a place for intro level talks. But I'm kind of in that space where I'm trying to figure out, what are interesting aspects and topics related to OpenTelemetry and observability in general to submit in. or submit for. And yeah, I think Adriana, you had a.
I did. Yeah, I was going to say on that same vein, because yeah, like as Reese said, it's getting harder and harder, especially in the observability space. And then it's interesting too, because like I think some of the folks on this panel have like reviewed CFPs as well for KubeCons. I've done a number of CFP reviews for KubeCons. And it's interesting to see what topics come up over and over and over. And I will tell y'all, AI comes up a lot. And it's almost to the point where you're like, oh my God, not another friggin' AI CFP, for the love of God. And they're not unique because like, here's the deal, right? There's nothing wrong with submitting a CFP on AI, but make sure it's friggin' unique at this point, because a lot of the stuff that's out there, it's like different permutations of the same thing. And so it's really about like, what's your unique take on it? And also, like, you know, we were talking about like end user stories. I think those are still extremely useful and relevant. But again, after a while, you start seeing a lot of the same end user stories. So again, when you're submitting an end user story, what is special? What makes you a snowflake when you're telling your end user story? The other thing I would say is like some folks try to like submit like project updates as part of like you know a CFP for like KubeCon or whatever, and it's like, dude, a project update does not automatically get you accepted. Like, save that for you know the relevant venue, because I think there's like special like project update sessions, for example. So those are like a couple of my pet peeves. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in.
No, I agree with that. Right? Like, it's like, how do you be trend? Oh, go ahead, Henrik.
No, go ahead.
I agree. How do you be trendy without being too trendy? But I see in the chat there's a thing about people don't understand the basics of OTel and Ollie. And Reese, when you were speaking about like trying to find your niche, do other people call it Ollie, or is it just me?
I love it.
Ollie, yeah.
Yes. Anyways, maybe at KubeCon, right? Like, that's true. Like, you need to you got to have something unique and novel to bring to a KubeCon conference. But outside of like getting outside of our bubble, right? Like, open telemetry is still a very niche topic. And I've had my introduction to open telemetry, right? Like, the smaller regional conferences are clamoring for those introductory talks on these, you know, niche topics that are our niche, right? So it doesn't feel that niche to us.
Yeah, and in my case, I usually try to avoid those introduction talks because I think many people will do the same. So it's just a matter of be different or bring a different angle. So then when the people will review your talk, then you get probably have an interesting angle that will bring value to the community. In my perspective, I do talks that are very expensive in terms of preparation, because I do a lot of benchmark, because I think I like to have those studies where you show numbers, you show things. It's like an experience, and then you show that to the stage, because I think it brings another value, because sometimes you don't show that in normal track. And I think by having that difference, you probably have more chance to be selected.
Nice. I guess, you know, related to this, I think the introductory topics and the more in-depth topics, sometimes, you know, when you're applying for to speak at a conference, you don't know what level of detail you want to go through, either in the CFP or in the talk itself. Is it good to, like, how do you know your audience, and how do you know what level of depth you want to apply? Reese, how do you normally go about it?
That I still find that tough sometimes. And sometimes I'll, you know, start with like, okay, I kind of want to be more high level about this topic, but in order for someone to come to this topic, they might need, you know, XYZ knowledge. And so even though it's more high level on that specific thing, it might be considered like an intermediate, if that makes sense. So it really depends. And I'll also try to, you know, consider like how much, you know, am I talking about something newer, you know, that was like more newly developed? So there's like less info about it, or is it something that's been around for a while? So I don't have like a really good answer. I still find it tough, honestly. I try to stick to like either beginner or intermediate level in general because of the topics that I typically choose to do.
And the thing is also it's a personal judgment as well. Sometimes you say, "Oh, I think it's beginner," or "I think it's I have no idea." It's complicated.
Yeah, what might seem basic to you might be very advanced to others, or the opposite, right?
Yeah, completely.
Yeah. Do you have any other tips there, Josh, to try to basically gauge the?
I have a quick anecdote. So yeah, it's hard to get it right. I gave one talk that was an introductory talk, but I was trying to make it a little more advanced. And I thought, oh, this seems like a fairly technical audience. I'd been having conversations with people at lunch. Everybody here is going to know what eBPF is. So I didn't mention it. And then the next speaker after me says, raise your hand if you know what eBPF is. And me and the one person I was talking to at lunch raised our hand.
Oh, well. That's awesome.
So, yeah, it's hard to get it right.
It's hard. Yeah. Right. Okay. So, Henrik, I'm going to go back to you because I know that you're everywhere in OpenTelemetry as well. So, like, I know that there's a lot of hot topics in OpenTelemetry. But yeah, so what are the hot topics that you recommend people be writing about right now? I know that, doesn't have to be OTel. I know that we all love OTel, but what are the sort of like the hot topics that you would recommend thinking about, writing about, or talking about? Sorry.
I think what I would suggest is that.
And by the way, AI is not valid. No, it is valid.
I think that in general, you have to look at in the previous conferences what has been presented and covered so far. So if you start to say, I want to do OpenTelemetry on instrumentation, there's plenty of them out there. There's plenty of video out there, and then there's no hot topic in general. So usually I try to bring the problem statement. So for example, how do I sample properly? How do I optimize that? Because there is a big in case of observability, there's a big concern about observability is going to be expensive. So how can I control that cost? So going on that directions. I think also there is another trend that I think is really important that people needs to be educated a bit more. It's the sustainability. So how can we make it green, make it better? So talking about AI is not going to be green because you're going to consume more resources. So maybe having another approach where you say, oh, we need to be good citizens of the world and save energy. I think that's a pretty good one. And also I think there is anything that new projects comes in. For example, today as we speak, OpenTelemetry profiling, there is few talks out there in KubeCon, and it's going to be more and more popular. So there's a big chance that profiling will bring new problems, new challenges. So covering them, that could be also interesting. So try to follow what happens in the industry and think about, if I start digging this, I may have problems. So how can I resolve them and maybe share that solution or this approach to a larger group, to the community.
Nice.
I was just add, Henrik, you're really good at this, right? Like you mentioned sampling, and I saw that video right in my feed, and I was like, oh, that's a great topic. I'm going to check that out later when I have time. So yeah, like if Henrik's talking about it, he can only be one place at once, right? So maybe that's an interesting thing for you to put your own spin on somewhere else.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely, absolutely. Any other takes on what are some of the hot topics?
I would like to add something. So, I think piggybacking on what Henrik was saying on the topics of sustainability, there's some really cool like CNCF projects out there on tech sustainability, and I feel like this is a super hot topic for the year, just because we're seeing a lot of stuff around like just wacky environmental things happening. Right, like increase in forest fires, bizarre temperature swings, and we're inherently in an industry that is contributing to the problem. So writing talks about how we can use technology to lessen the problem, I think can be really compelling and very timely. And so there's a hot topic for y'all, for anyone considering it. I would also mention, like, we talk a lot about KubeCons, and I think Josh made a point earlier about, like, there's a lot of conferences where, like, things like OpenTelemetry are still, like, kind of not super well known. So especially like a lot of these open source conferences, like Scale, for example, I think just added an observability track this year. FOSDEM, I think, would probably be another great one. State of OpenCon, another great one, where we probably there's probably not enough talks on observability. So getting into those sort of more niche conferences, I think would be a good place to start, especially if you're looking to do a talk on observability. Oh yeah, all things open as well. Reese mentioned in our chat.
Yeah. So, right, I'm going to take one question from the audience. Thank you so much for your questions. And again, if you've got any questions on what we're talking about, drop them in the chat and on YouTube or on LinkedIn. And the question is, should we go for a catchy title, for a clickbaity title when you write your CFP, or should you do something more perhaps descriptive and accurate? Josh, what do you think about that? Do you normally go for something like that?
I almost always do a clickbaity title, or at least I did. That was always sort of my way. But I've only been doing this for a couple of years, and someone who's been doing it for longer than me told me, actually, it's a pendulum, right? It swings, and what the conference organizers are looking for is going to swing back and forth, almost like a cultural zeitgeist. And there are times where they want it to be super, super specific, and we're not in one of those times right now. Maybe we're swinging in that direction, but for me right now, it does feel very much like the clickbaity titles are in, and maybe we'll all get tired of them because of the AI topic, and we'll be like, no, you need to tell me exactly what's in your talk so that I know that it's not a surprise AI talk, and that'll be where we're at a year from now. Who knows?
I think if you can come up with a catchy title that also will give the audience an idea of what to expect, or like what your topic is about, that is a great way to go. I also do really like just clear, straightforward titles as well. So I think they both have their place. And the content for sure is going to matter more, I say, because you could have a great catchy title and then the abstract is kind of, maybe doesn't really fully flesh out the idea. So I think the content is still king. But yeah, title is important as well. But as long as you have like a clear title and not necessarily like, kind of clickbaity or whatever, I think that's fine too.
When I preparing my talks, usually I try to bring the technical aspects and then try to find a funny angle or an analogy to a movie, to video games, to whatever, and then in the title I try to bring that fun angle, because at the end I think that could be more attractive at the end, because at the end when you have the schedule and you see a title that is more, I don't know, sounds more fun, then maybe more people will join your session for some reasons. Well, I think the title is as important as the abstract from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think. Sorry, go ahead, Adriana. No, go ahead, Adriana.
I was going to say, I do generally agree with you on that. The only thing I would caution against is make sure your titles don't sound like they were generated by ChatGPT, and B, make sure that your titles like aren't so pop culture-y where like it ends up alienating potentially the CFP reviewers. Like, I don't know, if someone's like making a Game of Thrones reference in a talk title, I'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm kind of like super put off by it. Mm-hmm. So I would just caution, like it's a fine line to tread.
Nice, and I guess that's as well part of. There are a couple of questions from YouTube, which are related to that, basically, to knowing your audience, right? So who's going to be reading your title, your CFP? So how do you know that? How do you know like how to approach the audience in a way that they would understand or engage with? And I'll ask that to Henrik.
It's a very, very good question. I usually goes to KCDs and to KubeCon and or open source friendly conferences. So I know that the people that will be in that conference has at least a technical background. So then I know that my talk would be not perceived as too technical. But yeah, if you go to a conference that is more salesy, then yes, you may have to adjust and say, okay, what are the type of personas that will be in this conference? Do I have the normal audience that I'm talking to in general, or should I reduce the complexity of my talk so then people can follow the idea behind this talk?
Cool. Right, I'm going to move on to another topic, which is like the post acceptance. So like you got accepted, hooray! So what happens now? How do you train? How do you rehearse? What advice can you give people to get ready for the day? I know it's a very wide question, so I'm going to start with Reese. How do you like prepare for it?
Well, so when I got my first talk, so funny story. My very first CFP that I submitted ever was also my first one that was ever accepted, which was huge and terrifying. And my manager at the time, she actually she got me a few lessons, virtual lessons, with a public speaking coach. And I found that was super helpful. It was just 3 virtual sessions, and I came away with techniques that I still use. But I also know people who, are great speakers who haven't gone through that professional training. But I say it's at least worth it to, if you have the resources to, I recommend it. But if not, there's also, YouTube videos you can watch, and of course, like, rehearse as much as you can so that you feel comfortable and it feels natural when you're like presenting. But I'm sure other people will have their own tips too.
Any other like tips or tricks to basically get to the training and rehearsing stage?
I usually don't. I do just a rehearsal, not a full fresh rehearsal. I'm just checking that my talk is basically I'm respecting the duration, because sometimes I put a lot of content and then I realize, oh, maybe there's too much here. So I need to maybe figure out by timing yourself, and then you know that when you will be on stage, there's a big chance that you will take probably more time. So I add a few minutes in to be always in time. I think that's the best thing. But what I usually do, I'm trying to put a lot of graphics, make it more nicer. That's my style. So I like to make a lot of graphics and make it more smoother experience for the audience. So that's something that I prepare a lot in the background.
Nice. I'm going to take now a question from the audience, and I think I'm going to pick Josh to answer this question. If a conference offers multiple formats, for example, lightning talk or a deep dive, and I could make your talk fit more than one, should I spam the organizers with multiple responses, or is there a better way?
In my opinion, that's something that will work if you know the organizers and can reach out to them directly, right? Like, or if they're having an office hours and you can talk to them about it and you can get that feedback, that's fine. But I do think that if you're a first-time speaker at the conference or sort of unknown to the conference, you have to sell the talk. You have to be a little bit more confident in the talk that you're proposing, because they're going to be evaluating you based on the talk more than how they know you as a speaker.
I see. Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to just mention something, like, especially depending on the conference, like some conferences don't have limits as to how many talks you can submit. And so sometimes, especially if you're like a newbie speaker, go for it and just see how far you can take it. But other conferences like KubeCon, where there is a limit on the number of sessions, I would caution against submitting like basically two versions of the session where it's like one's a lightning talk and the other one's a longer form talk. I think you probably have a better chance of just submitting like two unique topics, because you never know. Also, I will say, don't be afraid to recycle submissions at other conferences. It doesn't always have to be a unique topic. Super, super important. It saves you a lot of like mental energy, because putting together talk is a lot of work.
I would just add the fact that for the reviewers, if you have a talk and usually you design your abstract for a 30-minute talk, for example, then the reviewer would expect some details. So then you say, okay, so he's going to cover this, and that makes sense in 30 minutes because it's going to be well covered. And then if you then say, if you do the same CFP in a lightning talk, then you say, wow, how is he going to cover that in 5 or 10 minutes? So I think you need to adjust, of course, the way you're going to present the abstracts. I would definitely recommend to do like Adriana mentioned, to have two different submissions. One lighter for the lightning talks and one bigger for the panel, the normal track.
Cool. Okay, I think it's time to start closing thoughts. And I think one of the, well, not quite there yet, but one of the questions that people normally get is, I've applied to many conferences, and then you get rejected. And how normal is it to get rejected? I think how do you manage your expectations for getting your CFPs accepted?
I cry.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? So, Josh, do you want to go give us your thoughts?
Sure. I think someone, again, getting advice from mentors is great. Someone told me to expect a 10% acceptance rate. So if you want to talk at one conference a year, that means you need to submit 10. And I think that holds even for experienced speakers to some extent, as well as new speakers, at least from what I've seen. I don't know how you feel about that ratio. But
that's interesting, because I haven't actually done like a statistical analysis myself. But it is absolutely normal to get rejected. You think about conferences, some conferences get, especially the bigger ones, they get thousands sometimes. But usually like, at least tens of dozens or hundreds of submissions. And just because they rejected it, this time doesn't mean that they won't next time. I know people who've submitted the same one a few times to the same conference before it got accepted. So sometimes it's just timing. Sometimes it's just, they just have a lot of topics that were just really, really good. And sometimes too, you can also ask for feedback from the conference. KubeCon, for example, they're pretty good about sharing anything. If they get feedback on your proposal, they'll be happy to share it. So that's something to think about too.
Cool.
I also wanted to add, like, it's okay to like mourn your rejection. Because especially like when you're really invested in a topic and you think like, I've got such a great chance of getting this in, and you get rejected.
And you've got like a great title, and you're just
it's like, it's okay to mourn and take that time to mourn. And then, as Reese said, like, if possible, ask for feedback, resubmit it to that same conference or another conference, or like in the case of KubeCons, there's like so many across the globe. Submit it to a different KubeCon. Like if you didn't get in for NA, submit for EU. There's Open Source Summit NA. There's Open Source Summit EMEA. And also like take some time to reflect also on your CFP and see if there's like areas where you see improvement. Like sometimes I'll like write out a CFP and then I'll like, it gets rejected. I resubmit it for another conference. I'm like, ooh, yeah, I can kind of see why they didn't like that, and just make a few tweaks.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, thank you so much. I think now I've got one last question from you, and I think if everyone's been following the Golden Globes and the Academy Awards, you'll see that we've got quite a lot of horror films coming up and the awards. So I've got a question for you. I think you've been to many conferences, and I would like to hear some of the conferences that you've been to, because I think we didn't cover that in the intro, and I would like to know, some of the conferences that people could go and rewatch your videos. But also, like, if you've got a quick anecdote or something that failed, that was a bit of a horror story, right? So the mic doesn't work, or something that doesn't work. So can you tell us about it? And I'll go for Reese first, because she's got her hands raised.
My very first talk that I did, it was about tail sampling and OpenTelemetry. I had a live demo, And everything was working. I checked it right before my talk. Everything was working. Got up to the stage, started the demo. It didn't work. And I still don't know what it was because I got it to work a few minutes later. And I know there's some people that still remember that too. So anyways, that's I have other ones too, but that one is very sticks close.
Your recent conferences that you've talked at, Reese, I think some people can go and watch some of your talks.
KubeCon, SRE Con, all things open. I'm not sure if every one of those has recordings, but yeah, those are the big ones that I can remember off the top of my head.
Cool. Henrik, do you want to go next?
What it was my worst experience? I would say it happens once where I have to connect my laptop, the screen mirroring didn't work, and then suddenly I did the demo, and then you end up having nothing on your screen, and you're like this, and trying to type, and looking at, and it's like nightmare. I was to say, okay, the demo is going to be a nightmare, impossible to achieve, and so then I think the demo I try to skip it very fast. But I was not very happy. People didn't see so much because I try to react as fast as possible to avoid having that blank effect where stress coming up to you. But yeah, at the end I was unhappy because I said, my performance was just not normal and not acceptable. So I had to improve that. But yeah.
Where can we see you next?
Where can you? I was rejected for KubeCon London, so I've been crying. So now I think I have no tears anymore. So no,
it happens to the best. It happens to the best.
It does.
Yeah, the next I have a virtual conference that I don't know when it's going to happen in a few weeks. I'm presenting a talk, and then I submitted lots of talks for the season. So a lot of KCDs and KubeCon China and Japan. So we'll see. I didn't have the feedback yet, so cross the fingers. But otherwise, if you want to watch any content from my end, you can find it on KubeCon Europe, KubeCon North America, and then I have plenty of other KCDs where I have presented talks last year.
Awesome. Josh, do you want to tell us your horror story?
Yeah, it's actually quite similar to Henrik's. It had to do with screen mirroring and not working. And this was actually also like Reese in my very first talk. The audience could only see half of my slides. I could see all of my slides, but none of my notes. So my lesson that I took away from that is I never rely on my notes ever again.
Plus one to that.
Yeah. You have to have it all in your head. You have to be able to just talk about the thing for 20 minutes with no notes and no slides if it comes down to it, I think. Not to scare anyone else off from doing this, right? Like you can do that. Actually, it's not as hard as it sounds. But yeah, that was my worst horror story. Although I would say, like, I feel like at least something small goes wrong pretty much every time. And then where you can find me, right? A lot of DevOps days. I'm a really big fan of those, and I love that the KCDs are starting to sort of adopt that community format and sort of the open discussion format more. I really love those conferences, and I love to get the combination of like the people who are coming from all over, like you would see at the bigger conferences, and then just also the local representatives of the tech companies that are employers in that area.
Nice.
KCD in Edinburgh, yeah.
There is a KCD in Edinburgh. I find out this year, and it's probably because London is normally in London, but like I guess London is getting KubeCon, so at least we're getting something.
I didn't see the CFP yet. When is it open?
It's in October, so I'm not sure when the.
Okay.
But yeah, everyone in Edinburgh is really excited about it.
Cool.
I mean, I'm not sure the normal person in the street would be, but I am. Adriana, do you want to have tell us some of your horror stories?
I think for me, knock on wood, I haven't had any like horrid things happen during talks. So I will say that I am not a fan of live demos. And so I do pre-recorded demos. Actually, Reese and I have done a bunch of talks together. and the ones that we've done together have had demos, but they were pre-recorded but live narrated. So that is my tip for you if you're scared of live demos like I am. I think for me, the worst is like, when you give a talk and you're like, that wasn't my best work, and you feel like you're a little bit off. Like sometimes my voice is a little bit shaky, or I just like kind of forget my talking points. I think that's just getting rattled by that, and it's interesting because you come off a talk and people are like, oh, that was so great, and you're like, oh, I sucked, and so you kind of just have to like get over yourself, and just tell yourself like it happens, and it'll happen again, and you just have to be okay with it. And I would also suggest when you're practicing talks, practice like as you're practicing and you stumble, just like power through it, because that can happen in real life, or you stumble. So if you practice that during your if you stumble during your practice, don't like restart. See where it takes you. As far as conferences that I've spoken at, and I'm just sending Henrik a link to my YouTube channel because I have a playlist of all my talks. But like I said, Reese and I have done a bunch of talks. We've spoken at KubeCon North America and EU a few times together. We've spoken at Observability Day, North America and EU together. I've spoken at Platform Engineering Day most recently in North America. We've done all things, Reese and I have done all things open together. We did
Open Source Summit.
Open Source Summit, yeah, Open Source Summit North America and EU.
And we'll be at Scale coming up.
And what?
We'll be at Scale coming up.
Yes, we're going to Scale in March. We're speaking at KubeCon EU, coming up in London. And I got in for Observability Day EU as well. And then I did a DevOps Days in Montreal, and and one of my favorites was KCD Porto, where I got to give a keynote. Unfortunately, there's no recording of the keynote, but I have a blog post version of the talk if anyone wants to check out my Medium channel.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody so much you are really the dream team. So really, like all the veterans from all the conference talks, you can see that like from the amount of conferences that you've been. So thank you so much for your tips and tricks and your advice. I think it's been really, really useful. But I think that's all we had time for. And I just want to say thanks to the panelists. Thanks to the people that asked questions in the audience. I think we didn't get to cover all the questions, but we are always open in the end user SIG. You can come to the CNCF Slack. You can go to the resources that are here, basically, and get in touch with us. I think we would love to hear more about in general, anything about OpenTelemetry, but also about topics like this one. How do you go and talk about OpenTelemetry everywhere? So, with that, thank you very much, and see you at a conference.
We'll try to get to the questions that were unanswered in the Slack channel.
Yes. Right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.